Not at you, but at that reality that people interested enough to show, and then, yeah, fuck it. A man told his son, okay, here's how it goes. Everyone is conscious and everyone can think. So what? Get it? And guess what the kid's reply was? Go on, guess. One day a man faxed the king saying, since it's been brought to my attention that nobody knows shit, why should I listen to you? He did send it unsigned. And now, our inspirational anecdote of the day. Someone asked a mystic, how do you stay looking so young? And he replied, bad attitude. Oh, I'm sorry, I misread the heading of this. It should have said, our joke of the day, right? And now, courtesy of new intelligence, the new classroom of the air. Math in everyday life. Only the simple ask why, and only the equally simple respond to the first noted simple. Science, modern man's friend. Searching for patterns amidst perceived chaos will prove no ultimate boon for those who perceive chaos to begin with. Microsurgery, savior to the fat and those with little teeny brains. This heading has no body following it. The heading is the message. Page 3. A man stopped a wandering mystic and asked him, can you give it to me straight? And the wise one replied, okay. Anything that anybody else knows is useless to the likes of us. Communications update. Even if you don't have cable, even if you don't have a TV, you're still plugged into the network. One day, a viewer faxed us to ask, why is the great secret work so hard to find? And we replied, no one who's ever been a part of it has ever said that. Then, several hours later, he faxed us once again, quoting now, okay, can you give it to me straight? Okay, consider the potential confusion in trying to locate the source of mental light when your own consciousness is the sun. Today's Usopian fable. While taking the day off, a fox and a squirrel were talking, and the fox said to the squirrel, what do you think men would do if they knew we could talk? And the squirrel replied, you mean if they knew we could think and thus talk? And the fox said, why include that as a necessity? They don't. Moral, life makes men believe they should do better, so they'll do better. You might care to note that there's no moral to what animals say or do. Pardon me for asking, asked one guy, but would a mystic be a cargo whose vessel is somewhere else, or the other way around? There's this one chap who has his own personal sentiment, which he says, quoting again, the best thing about the future is that it only comes around once. Perhaps in some people's case it is the other way around. As put forward in a legend of some now forgotten people, the whole idea of some secret, extraordinary, mystical work came about after man had eaten real good, then sat around and wondered, what can we do now? Historical footnote. There are some who claim that the above is spurious, that no such people with any such legend ever existed, and that life itself put out the story as disinformation. As they stood watching the parade pass by, one man said to another, a notable aspect of these processions is that they carry with them their own internal rhythm machine. Which observation particularly interested the listener, since he had long marveled at the overall ability of the collective organism to stay in some kind of less than obvious step. Literary update. Your subscription to Nude Nympho Back Mamas will expire. Oh, it was the wrong update. I got it. So I got it. Men write fiction for one, and one overlooked reason only: to make heroes. Pretty flimsy reason, I'll bet nude back mamas would say. And now a fashion update. Only the greedy badmouth wealth, and the torpid greater attention. A man shouted out to his family, "Turn off that TV, the radio, and the CD player. They're driving me crazy." And they all shouted back, "But nothing's on." "Oh," he replied. When it comes to smart-dressed intelligence, the key word this season is wear it or lose it. As it headed off, the better potential part of one man's mind said to him over his shoulder, "If you ever run out of drugs, call me." And left him to analyze what it meant. The difference between thinking you know what's going on and actually knowing is kind of like describing the difference between being religious and being mystical in occupational terms. With the religious being those attempting to act as travel agents, trying to send you off somewhere they're not sure exists, and mystics being pretty far removed from all that, since all they know is where you came from and why it is you want to travel. Oceanographic moral: while nets strangle ordinary fish, a few find them instructive. Local conditions told his wife, "Remind me not to ever invite mystics to dinner again." One day a man suddenly stopped in his tracks and thought, "If you do ever get more conscious, I wonder who life takes it out on." And now another chapter of Go Figure, God Damn It. In an attempt to pass for wise, oftentimes the simple of mind will vociferously proclaim that all they know, they owe to others. By the by, if you can't go figure this one out, then you are one of them, but you knew that already. And of your rights. Sometimes after episodes such as the last one you just read, I strongly suspect that the so-called secret of the mystics is simply that they don't know any kind of secret. Yeah, sometimes I think that. Then again, and now back to the College of the Air and our history class already in progress. Even before the electronic age, life could look after itself quite well. Thank you. And that same viewer writes again, quoting again, "Phooey on all of you." Meanwhile, a man by the professor's desk made claim, "Those who gain power always abuse power. It's the same old story." Well, hell, man, wake up. Everything's the same old story. Did I hear someone say phooey? Creation myth time once again. After men became neurally conscious, to make them get up and go to work every day, life described itself to each of them in a slightly different manner. Heads up, pink slippers. This didn't fool mystics for a minute. Political, I think, science update. Kings concocted the idea of royalty just so they could take control. Brains did the same thing regarding consciousness and what it came to call thinking. But watch it. Inbred demented ones, this still hasn't fooled real neural technicians. A man told his son, "See, the way to tell if life really likes you or not is if it'll let you say things like that." And the lad inquired, "So how's it going to stop you anyway?" No. And be damned and be booted, the old man had never even looked at it quite like that. The priest said to the king, "I still advise against thinking things such as that. After all, better safe than later sorry." And the monarch replied, "You wouldn't by any chance have therein a vested interest." And the religious one blushed and poked the king in the ribs and says, "You old joker, you." And of your rights. Next Here next to me by the TV, I have a program guide, an unabridged dictionary, a new set of encyclopedias, several miscellaneous mind-altering drugs, a biography of Freud, and the home telephone number of a local weird person and spiritual advisor. And in spite of all this, I still got to ask you, what does all that mean? Just between us, I'll mention that one of the really excellent and groovy aspects of things transcendental is that you can't explain them even if you wanted to. Though God only knows why you'd bet on that horse in the third race. Daddy, what was that hag's name? Gotcha, son. Its name is Gotcha. Wow, Pops, can I be a mutter when I grow up? Okie doke, boy, but you mentally got to discover how to bring your own rein to the track. And by these words, the lad seemed to realize that to ever be more conscious, you must learn to do brain surgery on yourself and bring to bear on yourself whatever you individually need, taken from the collective reality that the ordinary already find to be oppressive, capricious, and adversarial. Okay, looks like we got a second fable. A moose and a bear were sitting by a stream talking, and the moose said to the bear, "In a previous life, I was Mozart." And the bear replied, "And in a past life, I was Merle Haggard." And the moose said, "But the hag's not dead yet." And the bear cocked his head, looked off in the distance, rather puzzled, and said, "Huh, well, that explains it." And now our maxim of the day. If you're going to get in arguments with other humans, get life to back you. No. P.S. If you don't understand this, don't worry about it. You wouldn't win anyway. Yeah. Regardless of the season or lack of a license, this one guy takes shots at the word try whenever he'd see the son of a bitch. Whilst discussing the question of personal freedom and comparing different forms of government, one man said to the other, "Well, one great thing about being Dutch is that at least you're not French." "Oh, damn, sorry, another mistake. It wasn't two people conversing. It was intelligence talking to stupidity." Damn, how embarrassing. Okay, to make up for it, a close reading, this time a close reading of a literal definition. Living an ordinary life. The coward's way out. All right, now who's embarrassed? The simple of mind always look to the past. Thus are the routine worlds of culture and education accounted for. Furthermore, this also explains why mystics don't ride the bus, even their own, since they must stay ahead of everything, including themselves. The song of collective man has a melody and a tempo, and when time zones are meshing well, they are complementary. But whether they presently are or not can be no distraction to a true individual thinker, inasmuch as if life don't kill you, life will. So why go out stupid? And now, once upon a time. Once upon a time, there was a man who was just a bit more mentally complex than most of those around him. And he finally decided he wanted to become powerful and recognized. So, he found other people who were just a little more complex than the ordinary, but not as much as him, and he told them, eventually, those simpler than us will see us for what we are, will resent our superiority, and will violently turn on us. So, come with me, let me guide and protect you from this inevitable travail of us against them. I don't really have to finish this for you, do I? And now, figuratively speaking, I could be wrong, but I do believe I just heard two of the brothers Grimm mutter, "Phooey," in our direction. And a viewer asks, if, as you said, all talk is allegorical, then how can one ever recognize the secret? Does anyone have any idea what the hell he's talking about? Health update. Having mere consciousness, you can bleed to death. Having controlled, not. The robed one addressed the crowd and revealed to them what he claimed was the mystic's secret code, which said, without originality, there is nothing. And someone asked him where he got it. Leaving shortly thereafter and finding himself on a road with no bus in sight, the mystic sat down in the dust and thought, if life don't kill you, stupidity will. So what the hell am I waiting for? And up he jumped, took off running. Okay, the super, supreme, final version. What if the awakening is a drug known to everybody, but mystics are the only ones that it makes high? All right, a third fable. A mink and a weasel were sitting around talking, and the mink asked the weasel, what besides his horrific odor distinguishes man? And the weasel replied, best I can recall, paraphrasing it, obviously. And the weasel replied, man is the only creature who believes in absolute, abrupt, instant change. And I would like to use that as a lead-in to some otherworldly geography. You do realize that is built into man and apparently supported specifically by all forms of so-called mystical literature. The instant conversion. The mind, when I said geography, the mind itself, due to the energy running things, has to believe, the simple version always being, it has to believe in a dichotomous universe, or it has to believe that, even if you got a little fancier at the street level, even if a scientist, a philosopher, a physicist somewhere, theorize that perhaps the old story that our, for instance, laws of nature may not be the absolute representation of nature. That is, reality may exist in some way apart from nature. That's nothing new, but they keep refurbishing it. And physicists, and cosmologists, and philosophers continue to make a cheap living, or at least get their doctoral degree, off of rehashing this. What I was going to suffice it to say is that the mind does operate in such a way that for anything to make sense, including language, that even if you would theorize, if you attempted to pass for being insightful enough to even suggest the possibility that reality, just what life is, may not be as simple as the mind says it is, you still do not see, the ordinary mind still does not see that that does not answer anything. They will say, well, I'm not sure, it's a theory, we can't prove it one way or the other. All you got to do is get past it. You don't need proof. You just look down, there it is. The mind must operate, regardless right now of someone surmising, guessing, suspecting that out here may not be an exact, or may not be capable of being exactly reproduced by human language, just the noise of this. There is still something useful in the fact that the mind can only see in a polarized manner. It has to do with the brain itself. And the idea of change, this being the brain, and this being the level of consciousness, collectively speaking, and each person has their own share of it. Above this is what is taken to be, in the mystical sense, in the transcendental sense, the place where great, immediate, abrupt change takes place. They do not, of course, analyze it like that, and it is historically, even today, still considered to be either outright religious, supernatural in nature, or at least inseparable from it. still, most people who would claim to be interested in whatever term they have been able to plagiarize, whatever struck them of being waking up, being enlightened, increasing their consciousness, they're all talking about that which historically and still in the main is looked at as being religious, being represented again by easily represented by all the great major religious figures. By the way, off the track, since we don't have tests here, and I don't ask people in TV land to fill out forms and send me letters. Not at all do I ask that, no sir. Periodically I mention this, but there is something of interest here. I'm talking about a personal, intellectual, neural interest, not theological, not theoretical, not historical. But every now and then I'll bring up a Buddha, I'll use an example, and I'll keep saying things like, well, if they existed, or etc. I'm not trying to play with words, and I'm not trying to weasel out of something, I'm not trying to insinuate something. But you should realize by now, if you understand anything, that to take point blank what are considered to be historical figures, actual people, not by my definition, but whoever everybody thinks that Jesus is, or Muhammad is, or Buddha is, they didn't exist, period. But that doesn't matter. What they miss by their stories, because the mind must, back to the dichotomous nature of the mind, ordinary people, if you talk to them, be they religious or not, if you were talking, you said, you're red, and you started coming out with some ideas or philosophy, and they seemed impressed, and you went, by the way, I understand you're an agnostic. And they go, yes, I am. Do you know who said that? And he goes, no. And then you throw it on them. Jesus, Moses, Muhammad. They would still be able, if they're operating at the ordinary level, which they would be, in a dichotomous way, they can dismiss it, because it's either those people actually existed or they didn't. Now, they didn't exist, but that doesn't matter, because they now exist. And what ordinary minds even miss, those who attempt to be students of mythology, or those who attempt to read theology or history in an allegorical manner, they still miss the fact that collectively, it's the nervous system of man. It's not, I know people's tried this idea of, in post-Freudian days, of the collective unconscious, and that's right. It's the collective nervous system. It is the general nexus that is the organism of life, continues to, I'm getting into the new areas, but to jump ahead of it, into the idea of there being a great conversion. All these ideas of a Buddha, a Jesus, and all that, is the mind looking into a promised land and seeing mirages. And I don't mean mirages in a pejorative sense. It is, I guess I'll have to make up a term. In audio, I'm sure some of you know, they're known as pre-echoes. I don't know a visual or mental, that's why I'm having to make it up. Pre-audio means, if you ever put on, those of you that still have vinyl records, you put in the first track of a record, and if you listen, normally you can hear a split second before the opening bars, you can hear it. It happens on tape in the studio. It's known as pre-echo. Cute term, but you hear what's going to happen before it happens, just for a split second. The reason I went through that, mentally, what men are doing, what humanity collectively has done with a Buddha, a Confucius, a Zoroaster, is they have seen the promised land. They have made that abrupt change into a new area of the brain in a very vague way, in a non-operative way, which I might also suggest to you, rather than just discounting, although some of them could be dingbats. There have been versions of this, of people nowadays flying saucers. 50 years ago, 100 years ago, those of you who don't know it, it was fairly reasonably acceptable in the civilized parts of the world, to Western Europe, that there were thinkers, philosophers, who had some who did not outright dismiss the idea of ghost. And of course, that's been around for years. People believe they talk to dead people. They believe they see spirits. All religions have some form of angels. In other words, things that do not exist. They're all in the same category. Angels, ghosts, flying saucers. And rather than just dismiss it, I'm not talking about someone who may have neural problems. But those who by any other account, I'm not going to stop and debate it, but by any other account seem to be sane, even though they are fishermen and they live in Mississippi who say that they have seen flying saucers. Rather than just dismiss it, what I'm telling you is the flying saucers are based upon the same neural phenomenon as Jesus, as Moses. It is a glimpse, and when I say it's inoperative, it doesn't do them any good. But it is like a pre-echo. It is like seeing what tomorrow is, but notice it doesn't, the reason I'm even doing this, it doesn't profit the people. If you took what I said and we made it very crude, if I were to analyze and translate myself, I could say, well, you're saying that someone seeing flying saucers in a sense is getting a glimpse of enlightenment. All right, let's say that right quick. But notice, what good does it do them? Nada. Nothing. They become a laugh. Well, it just does them no good. I assume you know that, any more than someone who says, I see spirits. The ghost of Gerda visits me every other Thursday. And you can say, well, that's amazing. But all you got to do is talk to the guy for a second if you can't size him up when you first see him and realize, well, even if it's true, a lot of good has done you. You must not have been listening or, See, the point is, which is, in a sense, if you want to look at religion having a problem in the sense that it does not give anxious people what they want, that does not feed it fast enough. That's what I mean by problem. They don't have a problem at the collective level, but the problem is, that's what religion is indicative of. Except it gets very complicated because it is indicative of a looking over Jordan River or looking over the Red Sea to the Promised Land, to go back to the kind of Jewish allegory. But you look at it, and now it was a looking at the future, but now it's looking at the future through the eyes of the past. In other words, religion's got two problems. One is it starts out too simplistic because it's the same basis as seeing flying saucers. Hey, Moses could go up on the mountain and come back and say, I saw God. Or if they'd known what he meant, he could come back and say, hey, I saw a flying saucer. It's the same thing. But then the second problem is, then it becomes part of the solidified structure, intellectual structure of man collectively. And so now, what was even at one time, a non-functional, an unprofitable glimpse of the future in man's brain, it is now that, you understand, it was already lacking to start with, and now it's lacking because it's dead. I was going to say back to where we were, if there's any chance any of us will ever find our way back. That's when they used to have the dance called the snake. I won't tell you what happened to the guy who wrote it and played guitar. Well, there was no Buddha. Nobody that described like that by the best definition. There was no Confucius. There was no such person. Because there was a person, but there was no such person as now remembered because they would not have done what they did, according to history. But what I was saying could be a prophet Jew. I'm not here giving, as you know, any sort of attempted historical overview, not even allegorically, because that's of no consequence to anybody out there in the ordinary world. I wouldn't even mention it to anybody in the ordinary world. They did not exist, and yet they do. And it's not simply they were invented, but you could call it that. They were conjured up by the collective intelligence of humanity. But they represent something, and not insanity, not derangement, not regression, not stupidity. But there were no such persons. Since it's a holiday, I can't resist one. There was a person, or this wouldn't have happened. But it wasn't whoever you heard it was. Fill in the blank. Buddha, Jesus. Of course, you can give yourself away about how simple you are if you want to ask, well, who was it? Or how close was he? Or, he didn't exist. But there was a person there. Back to the abrupt change. All of these figures, notice, and using religion as a springboard for the, not just allegory, but diving into the electrochemistry of man's nervous system itself, which we shall do shortly. Feet first or head first? You realize all the religions and every mystical system, every mystical tradition worthy of enough import that it is still remembered, it's still active. I'll put it that way. Thank you. They all have at their center the belief in conversion, an abrupt change. The focal figures, whether you've ever thought about it this way, in all the world's major religions also supported that, remembering that the ones you heard about didn't exist, but back to the way it's taken collectively. Abrupt. Some of you laughed the other night. I pulled out just one or two pieces of it in a different context, starting all the way back with Zoroaster and Buddha and Abraham. Abraham's a great story. His whole family made idols, which you can look at that as being the older part of the nervous system. I can't resist one more time to pull this out for an example. Notice what I'm about to do and what your own mind, not just me, what your own mind, what it wants to do. There's no such person as Abraham. There's no such person as an Abraham and his family made idols for all these heathens, and then what the story, the rest of the story I'm going to tell. There's no such, that didn't happen. And yet it did happen. And men make up collectively the story. Or those of you really getting serious, life makes up the story through man. And they yet fail. They repeat it. People will just swear by it. They will get very close to saying, well, it not only is it historically true, which, for instance, if we were talking to a Jew or a Christian, they would say, well, it is true. A serious, conservative, middle-of-the-road Christian or Jew, they'd say, well, the stories are true. But if they were a little more complex, they might say, not only are they true, we're into the world now of symbolism, not just metaphor. Metaphor being saying one thing and actually not meaning it. And symbolism, though, is saying one thing and it's true, but it's also something else. And so there are people who would qualify as being ordinarily religious, but they would push the idea, they would be, in a sense, a little more complex or sophisticated, which is meaningless again, but they might even affirm that there was historically a Muhammad, but everything told about his life, I believe it actually happened, which you've got to be a middle-of-the-road anything, but they might even insist there was also an allegorical meaning which turns it into symbolism, but it does not deny the fact that he existed. I'm telling you, he didn't exist. And they won't see the importance. They can't get past that. And I don't mean they, I'm talking about the ordinary level of consciousness when I say they. But look at the story. No one sees it. Just to take that one is as old as any. His family makes idols. It is the common form of worship. There in that part of the, I guess what's now Iran, but at any rate, Iraq. At any rate, and one day he looks around and he thinks, this is not right. And the story goes, paraphrasing it again, as if we had a choice. Finally, there's always a little build-up, like Jesus going off and wandering around for a while, or Buddha wandering around for a while, but then the time comes, it's like no more fooling around. The Buddha, I'll sit here until it happens. That's enough of this. I'm going to sit here. And then, so, obviously Abraham looked around, and he talked to people, and he looked at the idols, and he saw people worshiping them, and he knew, I'm making them in the back room. We make them, paint them, we sell them, and then people bow to them, including my own family, and they expect me to, and if they're looking at me, I bow, and I think, I made this son of a bitch. What the hell is that? And so the day comes, he finally, seems to be that abrupt shift, a conversion. And the religion's always, not necessarily in this story, but the religion's always that is tinged with the person being selected by the higher powers, the divine forces, that they decide, well, you're the one to straighten out this mess. Yeah. And as finally Abraham goes, what? This is nuts. And so he just goes through and he breaks up every idol in the family shop. And there goes, the Saturday movie, there goes Sunday dinner, there goes everything. Just over with it. And his father comes home, and the story after that's pretty irrelevant to my purposes now. But the thing was, he didn't break a few of them. He didn't break a few selectively. He did not break a few and then wonder. He did not break a few and then put them back together before his father came home. The story is, he just took whatever implement he had, and he broke every one of them. That's it. Buddha did not just get up at the night of renunciation and go, the Enlightenment, and go, well, maybe the was overdone. Wait a minute, let me think about this. He didn't kind of back up. Whatever the was, whatever he saw, it wasn't like he backed up. Or Moses, there's the promised land over there. And everybody looks. Of course, he looked. And he looked and he, Well, now don't get excited. Maybe it's not as great as I thought, which is another big jump if you didn't follow that. Or Jesus, the story going in the temple and turning over the tables of money changers, like, enough of this. It's like an irreversible act for the simple. Breaking the idols, turning over the tables there, and really pissing off the rabbis. That's the end of it. You're not going to come back and say, well, maybe I overdid it. It's like burning the bridges behind yourself. Don't worry about those in front, but you cannot go back. But then notice what it should represent, or I'm going to tell you what it represents. It is an absolute break. It is a jump to a whole different place in the brain. And you can call it the reunion with God. You can call it the enlightenment. You can call it a mystical experience. You can call it the satori. You can call it anything you want to, but it is a physical act. And it's getting better. Perhaps I should say more viscid, more interesting. My look at you is it's better. That would seem to, by my own description, I'm saying it is a jump to a new area of the brain. That would seem to be as befitting of the description dichotomous, polarized, as anything possible. It would seem to be the absolute world of black and white, at least any one mistake that I apparently started out, and can make it sound as though attempting to be more conscious is some sort of assault, subtle or frontal, on black and white thinking that will get you nowhere. Partisan polarized thinking runs the world, keeps the parade going. All you've got to do to march in the parade of life, the progress of life, is have what? 2 feet. That's all it takes. You don't even have to march much. Just stand there out with the crowd and you'll go. Your feet will move for 60 odd years. That's all it takes. But to imply, or worse, that kind of either or black and white thinking will take you nowhere, then what I just pointed out about the so-called enlightenment, the kinds of experience, would seem to even be a denial of what I just said. To it, that it is an absolute jump from one place to another. Now what I submitted was the more interesting part. Of course, some of you hear it, you're not going to find it more interesting, you're going to find it more irritating, probably. No, wrong word again. Damn, is that enough mistake? Encouraging. That was it. After even what my interpretations, the kinds of things I've been suggesting, the absolute break of Abraham and the idols, of Jesus and the money changers' tables in the temple, of Buddha being completely versed and expert in all of the Hindu beliefs, and then sit there until it hit him and he went, and they even called it the night of renunciation, the night that he saw the light, like, screw the rest, they're wrong. I understand it as well as they do. He could have been a leading Hindu priest. And he realized, nuh-uh. That sounds as though that is a complete break. That's what I was inferring. And yet, it can't be. And I have written enough fables and one-liners and news items, apparently also denouncing the past, which I must add, sotto voce, or off to the side with us, the past deserves it. But denouncing the past will not make it go away. And I don't mean will not make it go away out there, because there is no out there. You are the past. There is, it's getting more rococo if you're following it. Within that is the fact that when the brain becomes activated on the other side of the Red Sea, when you get past the idols, after the night of renunciation, when your brain when you have a mystical experience, it's a shame everybody can't see the clock, because it always gets better toward the end, because I can quit fooling around. I have to quit. The experience has been well recorded, Anyone who understands it has no complaint with the most common descriptions of mystical conversions, and even in areas where it's not considered mystical. If you just consider religious conversions, outside the mystical, let's say, well, something to good Christians, Catholics, that doesn't seem to be that mystical. The idea of Saul, a persecutor of Christians, walking down the street, and he wasn't even trying to be a mystic. He was in charge. The rabbis had hired him out to go round up Christians, badmouth them, have them attacked, turn them in for taxes. And he's walking along the highway going somewhere, and suddenly falls down and has a mystical experience, and by all reports, had not asked for one even once. Wasn't looking for one, it just hit him. After that, taking their representation, taking the history, without them realizing what, he even changed his name. Talk about being part of an allegory and not even realize it yourself. He realized that he was now so drastically removed in his thinking. They don't use that word. But he has so drastically changed from what he was that he now changed his name itself. That, I'm sure one would submit, is a drastic change, in which from that day, not only since, but before that, as everyone should know, it's a great old story of those who, attempting to undergo that kind of transformation, who believe they have, who claim they have, who apparently have. Cover it all. It's very common. You pick out a new name. Very old idea. Many times you pick out a new way to dress. If everybody's there wearing long hair, you shave your head, and vice versa. And put some sort of identifying mark that you are showing I'm a different person. Those are the transformations that history remembers, which I must point out to you again, are the transformations that do not occur. Because the real Buddhas, remember there was a real one, but not that one. They do not live the enlightenment in public. They do not live their life in public. If there was a real Buddha or Jesus or Moses, and he did say something that they wrote down and remembered that's still there, I give you my word, you may rest assured, it was a lie. He did not, none of them, told personal anecdotes about himself that was not absolute bullshit. If it was just, if he had to do it for an example or for some reason they insisted, well, tell us about yourself, or I like your kind of stories, but, tell us a little something about yourself. If for whatever reason, if he just did, I assure you, it was not true. It was an outright lie. That's not what we call, it's not what we call it in the biz, but it's what you would call it is a lie. You do not live that life in public by any degree. You don't live it in public to the point of taking a new name or of changing the way you dress. The conversion is not absolute. You haven't lost your place, have you? It seems to be absolute. The stories are based on reality, and some of you don't need the stories. You know what it is. That it is. Rather than sitting under a bowl tree or wandering around in kind of an upset mood in your father's idol shop in Damascus. It's after all of this, it's like one morning you wake up and you realize, God damn it, this is it. You understand at least the souls, the two souls I gave you of the awakening experience. It is, and those of you who know it, but I'm going ahead and describe it since I promised a geography lesson, and it's a holiday. You have actually gone into the promised land. You have actually gone up on the mountain. You've done all that. You have had the Buddhahood enlightenment. And yes, there you are. And I got to refer you back. Some of you may not weren't here, but last time I was telling you that there are actually two souls, S-O, the word soul, of the enlightening experience, or the experience of enlightenment. The first one being soul. The second one, so that's why they couldn't describe it. You understand then what it is. You are still conscious. You do not suddenly jump up. None of you have ever had the urge. Those of you that had the experience, you had no urge to get up and go, now I understand. By God, I will shave my head and put, paint a green band around my head, or wear a robe, throw away all my clothes. Nothing. You had not the least urge to do anything commonly known as mystical, known among us in the business as weird. Actually unprofitable, but that's what we just kind of call it, weird. You had no such desire, none. You did not have desire to do anything publicly. Although you didn't know the words at the time, you had no intention. You had no desire. There was nothing motivated you to go out and share this with the world. To be real specific, since it is a holiday, I know, at least those of you that I know personally, you had only one desire along those lines, and that is you wish that you knew where I was right then, so we'd go have a cup of coffee or just sit next to a stream and spit. Maybe chuckle whenever the mood moved you. But all those of you who have tasted, you had no inclination, none whatsoever. There wasn't even a chance that you were suddenly going to become a prophet, that you were going to proselytize this. In other words, you had no desire whatsoever to go live this in public. It is not a public phenomenon. It is not collective, and it only happens internally. That is why I refer to it not in it being a judgmental or negative manner, that to do anything mystical externally, as religions are wont to do with what they're left with, is you have to apparently be directing all efforts toward behavior, and once you find out that, well, I've spent 30 or 40 years here being a good Christian, Jew, or Muslim, or whatever, and it hadn't done anything for me, well, let's see. I'll start dressing different. I will show that I have undergone the conversion. And all of the religions, notice, and even the publicly known would-be mystical systems have accommodations for that. That after you've been there 5 or 10 years, when you first start in some Zen school or Sufi school or any kind of school, that's known and you find it, and they'd say, well, now first you got to start and wear a brown robe with no sash. And once you reach stage 1, they'll have some kind of great chart and ways that we go from Cairo, and then we move out in the desert, and then we get close to the Red Sea, and then we get in the Red Sea. There's a whole process. There'll be a chart somewhere that you move up in the world, which is, why else would you join? You got to go in. The only alternative would be me referring you back to some of my own bus schedules, which points out that a mystic can't even find the bus station. That's a crude way. He knows exactly where it is, and wouldn't go there, they could kill him. Because he knows that the buses don't go anywhere. Everybody goes in there, and they sit down in their their bus seats, and they sit there, and if you try to talk to them, they're all going, whee, and saying, looking out the windows and thinking, look at the sights. Boy, am I glad. It's delightful that I'm a Buddhist or I'm a Sufi or whatever. And you look and you think, well, they're just sitting there on the bus in the station. They're never going anywhere. But anyway, everybody needs a hobby. They'd go nuts. The experience does not entail at all trying to share it, does not entail at all wanting to live it in public. You didn't lose your place. It is, in a sense, at that time, those of you who know it, it's an understatement, it doesn't even explain anything, but you know this is it. This is as far removed from me as I could be. Not out here, you don't grow another foot, you don't get taller, you don't lose weight, your hair doesn't grow back in. It's here. It's one place. Even if you grew up thinking, well, it's a change of heart and all that, you don't feel it anywhere but there. You feel it right where man, the singular creature on this planet, lives, and that's here. You live down here too, but so do moose, beavers, raccoons. Man lives here. The enlightenment happens right there. You do not feel it here. I know schools, religions say it do. Some would-be mystical schools say you feel it here, or even lower. Now, they might, but you can feel all kinds of things down there. I mean, some neat things, but you don't feel enlightenment down there. You feel it right here. And when you do, when that day, if the day comes, back to this, I'm trying to be a little more specific in geography tonight, you know, well, this is it. And in a sense, you realize this is as far removed from me. I might as well have jumped over from one level to another. I might as well have jumped from Egypt, from captivity, to the promised land. Or I might as well have gone to every idol. That is, everything that my mind took to be true and worthwhile, and I might as well have broken every one of them. Broken them. You can't put them back together. It is a discrete jump. That's the way it feels, except for this. You do not pass out. You do not look down and think, well, I don't recognize me. You don't walk in the kitchen to your wife, husband, mother, father and go, You do not, in the ordinary sense, you do not undergo a mystical experience. Hollywood version. Religious version. I ran through real quick tonight. A viewer, it said, wrote and asked, is a mystic actually just someone whose cargo is one place and his vessel is somewhere else? There you stand. It's still you. You don't feel superhuman. You can't fly. You don't think you can fly. You don't have to go test it. Well, I should bypass all this. Everything you ever wanted to know, everything that everybody else always wants to know or doubts or has to be tested, you instantly know it. It's not even, so all that's funny to me saying, you don't go test it. But there you stand. And in a quite real sense, and as real as it can be verbally, you have been converted. Your brain is now in a place that has never operated individually, and collective man certainly does not. It is now alive. You are as different as Saul was to Paul. You're as different as Abraham was when he became a Jew rather than becoming an idol worshiper. You are as distinctly different as can be. There you stand, or there you lay in bed, and you know it. But the past is not dead. The conversion is not that discreet, and in one sense, it's not permanent.
Yeah.
That is. Even if, let us say you're Moses, if you're finding allegory, and you go from captivity, you go from the old land, or you're Abraham, and you're an idol worshiper, which all you got to do is see that is the area wherever the level of consciousness was at that time, and you break it all, or maybe spatial, it sounds better. You're Moses, and you go across the Red Sea from captivity. That is ordinary thinking, no matter whose it was. It's not the Egyptians' fault. It's nobody's fault. It was wherever he was. Let's say that you physically move, you get across the Red Sea, you escape them, and you get to the Promised Land. We've got to go spatially. It's kind of like Plastic Man. Do they still have that comic book? You go over there, but 1 foot. It stays in Egypt. Not just captivity, it stays there, which is what I was trying to infer to start with, that you wake up and you're in a different state, an absolute different state of consciousness. I even hate to talk like that. As you know, I do not normally, because it's almost despicable. It's almost a real form of blasphemy, which none exists, but it's damn close, to even for me to say you're in a new state of consciousness. I just said that. It is as discreet, it is as far removed as it can be, except for this. You did not wander off in a flying saucer. You did not now spiritually or something fly off and be with God or Jehovah or Judge Crater or Elvis. You're still right where you were on this planet, in your body. The nervous system's still working. You are sane, to say the least. You are conscious, to say the least. You are still physically functioning. And yet you have left Egypt, and you are now in the Promised Land, except 1 foot. You cannot abandon what you were. You cannot get away from it. Slip in right quick. This should be of some useful interest to some of you. That is also a part of where religion sprang collectively, is that those who have had it, even those who have it, quote, accidentally, like a Paul, like a Saul, or those I'm saying that just have sort of low-level mechanical pre-visions of it. It's like unasked for small experiences. It is so astounding to people, and sometimes it happens with drugs. But people that do not, in a sense, deserve it. People who have not absolutely directly worked for it. Of course, that may not even work, but at any rate. That is part of where religions come from, is that people, they understand this is so delicate. They are so amazed that they do, once it begins to wear off. You know, I told you don't feel any need to share it. You know you can't go talk about it, but it begins to wear off. That your weight begins to shift, as it will inevitably do. Your weight begins to shift back more. Imagine this is Moses' right foot in captivity, the idol worshiper. It's Muhammad when they were idol worshippers. He's over here in the old thinking. He's below at the ordinary level of consciousness, and over here he's in the promised land. And the mystical experience is this. It's not on one foot. It will inevitably. Hours, days, and people can feel it. They feel it. That's when you really wish you could find me, because you know there's got to be a trick to stop it. Die right then. But your weight will shift back. And I don't mean this is something irreversible and it's one-time thing, but your weight, you will go back. If you're on this planet and you're alive, you're part of the human nervous system. The human nervous system. It will go back, and as it begins to happen, and especially after most of it's happened and people are back, that is where the idea of doing good work, charity, the whole basis of being more civilized in a religious sense, that is part of what I was saying, where the sprouts of religion come from. And it's understandable. You'll know it when it happens. Is when you feel it slipping and you think, God, I'll do anything to do it. And the best hint I'd give anybody